Have you ever seen someone walk into a courtroom like it's just another VIP boutique their family owns? The judge had, and the moment she crossed the threshold, he knew this wasn't really about a parking ticket. The Providence courtroom moved at its usual slow pace. Older men and women waited on worn benches, tickets folded in their hands. A police officer near the door watched the room in silence. Then she walked in. The line to the clerk's window stopped as she did, one hand on a designer bag, the other on her phone. "I told you, it's nothing," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "5 minutes and I'm out. They know who my brother is." The officer's eyes followed her now. At the counter, she slid her papers forward with 2 fingers. "Name?" the clerk asked. She gave her last name like it should explain everything, then added, "My brother probably called about this already." The name hung in the air. People had seen it on malls and plaques across Rhode Island. The clerk's hands paused before typing. At the bench, the judge's assistant pulled a thin file from the stack and laid it closer to the judge. When her case was called, she walked up the aisle without looking at anyone. Her heels clicked a quick rhythm on the floor. An elderly man moved his cane to let her pass. She didn't notice. At the rail, she set her phone face up and folded her arms. "Next matter. Parking violation," the clerk announced. The judge opened the file and looked at her over his glasses. "Ma'am," he said, "this citation says you parked in a handicapped space in front of a small family store. Is that correct?" She gave a small shrug. "I was there a couple of minutes. There were other spots." He read from the report. "Officer notes he warned you twice that the space was reserved, that you stayed anyway." "I was on my way to a meeting," she replied. "I didn't have time to argue in a parking lot." On the side bench, the officer who'd written the ticket sat with folded arms. At that, his eyes rolled. She caught it, shot him a look, then turned back to the bench. In the second row, the man with the cane murmured, just loud enough to carry, "That's why folks like us never win." "You've said," the judge continued, "that you like to park where you won't be bothered. Is that what you told the officer?" "Yes," she answered quickly. "Exactly." He let the word hang, then glanced at the bold print of her last name before meeting her eyes. "All right," he said quietly. "Then we'll talk about what not being bothered means when you're standing in someone else's space." The room tightened into silence. The dollar amount on the ticket was small, but everyone on those benches understood something much larger had just been called to answer. She held her posture, like someone used to winning rooms by simply standing in them. But beneath that stillness was a tension the judge had seen before, usually in people who fought much harder than their mistakes required. He closed the file gently. "Tell me a little about yourself," he said. A faint, defensive smile flickered. "You already know. Everyone here does." But he didn't take the bait, and that unsettled her more than any criticism could. She was the younger sister of the state's most successful mall owner. His empire spread across Rhode Island like a constellation of bright, glowing signs. Her brother's name appeared in charity galas, hospital wings, political fundraisers. Hers appeared mainly in social columns. Officially, she worked in PR for his company. Unofficially, everyone knew the position existed for her convenience, not her skill. People assumed that made her satisfied. In truth, it made her constantly afraid. She straightened her shoulders. "Look, my family contributes a lot to the community. My brother employs hundreds. We support local events. It's not like I'm out there hurting anybody." The judge didn't respond. He simply waited. That silence made her talk more. "I'm always expected to look strong, to be composed, to represent the family. If I slip, people think I'm just decoration." She caught herself and stiffened again. "Anyway, this is overblown." A woman in the back row raised her hand. The judge nodded. "I was there," the woman said. "I saw you tell the officer he was wasting your time." For a brief second, The younger woman's jaw tightened so sharply her breath stopped. She glanced over, gauging whether the judge believed her accuser. The room felt smaller now, not unfriendly, just honest, in a way she wasn't used to facing. The judge looked down at the paperwork. "You stated in this form that you were rushing to an important meeting." She nodded quickly. "I was." He tapped the page lightly. "The city camera shows you waited for your latte at the cafe for 12 minutes. Her throat bobbed. She didn't have a clean way out of that. "And," he added mildly, "your appeal wasn't filed by you. It was filed by your brother." This time, she didn't answer. Her gaze drifted toward the bench, unfocused, as if she wished she could pick up her phone and vanish into the glow of it. Her foot shifted. Her fingers grazed the bracelet on her wrist. Not jewelry, the judge noticed, but something with a tiny pulse sensor blinking discreetly. He'd seen those before. People wore them when their anxieties hit harder than their reputations allowed them to admit. When he continued, his voice was steady but not unkind. "Why didn't you file it yourself?" She hesitated, looked down, looked up again with a brittle smile that cracked at the edges. "I didn't want to deal with all this," she said. "People watching, whispering, assuming." The whispering became real this time, a few soft exchanges among the benches. The facade she'd worn so tightly began to slip, just a little, revealing something rawer underneath. The judge leaned back, studying her, the way one studies a door that is shaking because something inside is pushing to get out. "You're used to standing above the situation," he said gently. "But you walked into this one carrying more than a parking ticket. You know that, don't you?" A breath escaped her, half sigh, half admission. She didn't answer. But the silence she left in the air was more honest than anything she'd said so far. The judge folded his hands, studying her with a calm that made the room feel suddenly sharper. "You said you were rushing," he began. "Tell me, who were you meeting?" She blinked once. The pause was small but unmistakable. "With the city manager," she said, too quickly. A ripple of quiet amusement passed through the benches. In Providence, everybody knew the city manager was out of state that day. The judge merely tilted his head. "That's interesting," he said, "because he's in Connecticut until tomorrow." Her posture faltered. One shoulder lowered before she caught it and corrected herself. But the damage was done. Her certainty had taken its first measurable dent. Before the judge could say more, the officer who'd written the citation lifted a hand. It was unusual. Officers rarely interrupted. "Yes, officer," the judge said. The officer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I wasn't planning to bring this up, but right after I issued the ticket, her brother called my department." He shifted uneasily. It was less than a minute later. The room went still, the air tightening around her like an invisible cord. She snapped. "He called because he didn't want me dealing with unnecessary attitude." The judge raised a hand, and she fell silent. Not obediently, just aware that pushing further would expose more than she intended. Before anyone else could speak, the elderly man with the cane stood. He adjusted his jacket, steadied himself, and faced the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "I own the store she parked in front of." Her face drained of color. He continued, "My son uses a wheelchair. That space is the only one he can safely access when he comes to help me. I asked her, politely, to move for 1 minute." His voice thinned, but not from anger. "She told me it wasn't her problem." Each word landed like the slow closing of a door. The judge didn't interrupt. Neither did the room. Even the officer looked down at his hands. The store owner exhaled. "We're a small place. We fight every week to keep our doors open since the new mall went up. Losing that space for 10 minutes means losing customers for an hour." That detail struck hard. The mall her brother owned was quietly starving the little businesses around it. Not by design, just by scale. But she had turned the knife without realizing it. She stared at the man, her throat tightening, but no apology came. She wasn't ready to give one. Not yet. The judge tapped the file. "Officer, the call from her brother. What was it regarding?" The officer hesitated. He apologized. Not for the ticket, for her behavior. Her eyes snapped to him, wide and startled. That wasn't the narrative she expected. A flush rose up her neck. "And he said," the officer added quietly, "that he hoped we'd treat her with patience." That small revelation rearranged the room's understanding, and hers. She'd always imagined her brother defending her, sweeping problems aside with influence. Instead, he had been softening the blow, shielding others from her impulse to lash out. Then the judge's gaze shifted to her left wrist. "You've been holding your arm since you sat down," he said. "That's not a bracelet. It's a therapeutic monitor." Her hand jerked, instinctively hiding it. "It tracks stress responses," he continued. "Most people who wear them are fighting something they don't talk about." A tremor crossed her expression, fleeting but real. "I don't need pity," she said quietly, but the edge in her voice had dulled. "No," the judge replied. "You need honesty." He leaned forward just slightly. "And I don't believe you're here because of a ticket. I think you're here because you're losing a battle no one else can see." Her breath hitched. For the first time, she didn't look defiant. She looked exposed. The room waited. Not for the judge's next words, but for her first real one. The judge let the silence stretch until even the hum of the fluorescent lights felt loud. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the softness from before. "How often do you appear in this courtroom?" he asked. "Because this isn't your first citation for conduct like this." Her reaction was small, almost invisible, but unmistakable. Her breath caught, shoulders drew tight, eyes fixed on a point just above the judge's head. A ripple of murmurs moved through the benches as people sensed the shift. Something larger was about to break open. He reached for a thicker folder that had been set aside earlier, one she had assumed was unrelated. "This," he said, "is a record of 3 prior incidents that never reached a hearing, each one dismissed administratively." She stiffened. They were misunderstandings. "Let's see," he said, opening the file. Incident 1. You blocked a wheelchair ramp outside the hospital because you needed only a moment. The ramp was in use. A faint tremor traveled down her arm. Incident 2. 2 separate events at your brother's mall, where you asked parking staff to look the other way because you were running promotions. People shifted in their seats, not hostile, just absorbing a picture that had always existed but had never been spoken aloud. Incident 3, the judge continued, involved a parking officer filing a memo after your brother intervened to quiet the situation. He didn't ask us to remove the ticket. He asked us to show leniency toward you. Her chest lifted in a sharp inhale. This wasn't the story she told herself, that her brother cleaned up after her out of pride, loyalty, or shared superiority. This was a different narrative entirely. He'd been trying to protect the public from her, not the other way around. The judge turned a page. There's also an email from your brother. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. He read it aloud, without theatrics, without emphasis, just a plain truth allowed to breathe. I'm sorry for my sister's behavior. We're doing everything we can to help her before she hurts someone or herself. The final words struck harder than any courtroom reprimand could. Her phone vibrated on the table, startling even her. She didn't dare touch it. The room watched, not with judgment now, but with a kind of collective stillness. People recognizing the moment when a person runs out of excuses and has to face the weight of her own reflection. Then the store owner, the man whose son used a wheelchair, lifted his hand again. Your Honor, he said quietly, I wasn't going to mention this, But her brother also spoke to me the day it happened. He asked me not to file a complaint, told me she'd been under strain, said he didn't want her going through a public ordeal. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Ma'am," the store owner added, turning toward her, "you're not the villain your behavior makes you look like. But you can't keep expecting the world to bend around your frustrations." She swallowed hard, her throat visibly constricting. The judge gently closed the file. Then he looked at her wrist again, the subtle device she kept hiding, the small, blinking indicator no one else would have noticed. "That stress monitor," he said. "You didn't wear it as a fashion statement." Her hand snapped back protectively. "There's no shame in needing help," he added. "Yes, there is," she said suddenly, voice tight. "Where I come from, there is." For the first time, her tone had no arrogance, only a raw, unpatched truth. She glanced at the floor, her hair shifting forward like a curtain she could hide behind. "I can't be the weak one," she whispered. "Not in my family. Not in this city. Everyone keeps score." The judge leaned back, studying her not as an offender, but as a woman trapped in an unspoken war between public image and private collapse. "Weakness isn't unlawful," he said quietly. "Indifference is." That line hit like a steady moral anchor dropping through storm water. The benches fell completely silent, the kind of silence that comes when a courtroom realizes the case isn't about punishment anymore. It's about a reckoning that's been years overdue. And for the first time since she walked in like she owned the place, she finally looked like she understood it. For the first time, she didn't try to straighten her posture or lift her chin. She sat absolutely still, as if the truth in the room had finally caught up to her, and she no longer had the strength to outrun it. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," she said quietly. "I just couldn't let myself look small." Her voice wasn't sharp now. It wavered. The judge didn't rush her. In this courtroom, silence wasn't an enemy. It was a space where people finally told the truth. "When my brother became successful," she continued, "people stopped seeing me as me. They saw me as an extension of him. And every time I failed at something, that feeling got louder. I kept thinking if I showed even one crack, people would decide I didn't deserve anything I have." She blinked, and her breath trembled on the way out. "I kept acting strong, but it wasn't strength. It was panic." The room breathed with her, older folks on the benches looking at her, the way grandparents look at a child who finally admits they're scared, not spoiled. The judge regarded her with that steady, almost paternal stillness he was known for. "Your struggle doesn't make you a bad person," he said. "But your choices, they affect people who don't have your safety nets." He gestured gently toward the store owner. "His family doesn't have lobbyists or corporate backing. A blocked space isn't an inconvenience, it's a barrier to living." She didn't look at the man. Not yet. She wasn't ready. The judge folded his hands. "I'm not punishing you for your family name. I'm responding to how you've treated people who did nothing but ask you for basic decency." He paused, not dramatically, but with intention. This city values small businesses, values people who show up and give respect, even when they're tired, or stressed, or overwhelmed. Your brother understands that. That's why he succeeds. Her eyes flicked up for a moment, almost a flinch of recognition. She knew it was true. Her brother had always been gracious. She had mistaken that for weakness. And, the judge continued, this city takes accessibility seriously. A disabled parking space isn't optional. It's not a convenience. It's independence. The room absorbed that, a quiet reminder of American values older than any mall. Then came the part no one expected. The judge turned to the store owner. "Sir, is there anything you'd like this court to consider before I issue a decision?" The man adjusted his grip on the cane. "I don't need money," he said simply. I just want her to understand what my son deals with. For one day. Just one." His voice didn't carry anger, only a firm, unshakable clarity born of a lifetime, caring for someone who faced barriers everywhere he went. The woman's breath caught. She didn't recoil. She didn't snap. She just listened, as though hearing a human truth she'd never allowed herself to imagine. The judge nodded slowly. "In that spirit," he said, "I'm going to exercise a bit of judicial discretion. I could fine you. You'd pay it without blinking. It wouldn't teach you anything." He leaned forward. "Instead, I'm assigning you 30 hours of volunteer service with a local organization that supports individuals with mobility challenges. You'll learn, you'll participate, you'll observe, and you'll stay the full 30 hours." A murmur swept the benches. Not disapproval, not shock, just a collective recognition that this was the kind of justice the courtroom rarely witnessed, but always remembered. Her response came after a long delay, long enough that the judge didn't push, long enough that the room realized she was wrestling with something heavier than embarrassment. Finally, she exhaled and said quietly but clearly, "I can do that." Not defiance, not surrender, just a beginning. The judge nodded once. "Your brother has given much to this city. Maybe now it's your turn to give something back." It was the first time she looked at the judge with something like respect, because he hadn't humiliated her. He'd asked her to rise. And somewhere inside, she knew she needed that more than protection or excuses. This wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was the closest she'd ever come to wanting it. The judge's gavel didn't strike. It simply rested beside his hand, as if this moment didn't need noise to seal it. "This ticket," he said, his voice calm but resonant, "is a small thing. But the way you've carried yourself, that's a signal. And whether you admit it yet or not, you came here needing more than a ruling. You came needing a reminder." He paused, letting the room settle around his words. "Before the law, we stand equal. Titles, donations, last names. None of that carries weight here. Truth does." It wasn't a lecture. It was the kind of steady wisdom older Americans recognize, a tone shaped by years, not ego. She lowered her eyes, fingers resting lightly on the wrist sensor she'd spent an hour trying to hide. For once, she didn't seem to be performing for anyone. The judge leaned back. "You'll complete your service. No shortcuts, no special treatment. And when you're done, I hope you walk away not with shame, but with clarity." He closed the folder with a soft thud. Case resolved. But the room didn't move. No one stood. It felt as if everyone sensed the story hadn't quite finished. She rose slowly, collected her phone, smoothed the crease in her jacket. She looked smaller than when she'd entered. Not diminished, just human. Instead of heading straight for the exit, she turned toward the store owner. People watched, expecting an apology, something neat and cinematic. But she didn't offer one. Instead, she said quietly, "If your son ever needs something at my brother's mall, an entrance made easier, a ramp adjusted, parking closer, tell me. I'll handle it." She wasn't offering sentiment. She was offering access. That was the currency she understood, and for the first time, she spent it on someone who couldn't repay her. The store owner gave a slow nod. Not acceptance, not relief, just acknowledgement that her words, for once, were unvarnished. A hush lingered as she stepped into the aisle. No applause, no smiles, just a thoughtful, layered silence, one that said the room wasn't sure whether she would truly change, but it had seen enough to hope. Halfway to the door, her phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen. Her brother. She hesitated, an unfamiliar flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. Then she answered. "Yeah," she said softly. "Court's over." A pause. No, I'm fine. I know you were trying to help. Another pause, gentler this time. Listen, I need to talk to you. Not about the ticket, about other things. Things I should have said a long time ago. Her voice wasn't shaky now. It was steady, deliberate. A tone that sounded like someone finally willing to come out from behind the protection she'd resented and depended on in equal measure. She ended the call, tucked the phone away, and pushed open the courtroom door. As it closed behind her, the judge watched from the bench. He murmured almost to himself, but the clerk heard it, and so did the nearest row. Maybe that was her first honest step. The benches began to empty. People left quietly, carrying with them a lingering mix of justice served and something more complicated, something like cautious optimism. Because the truth was this: one small case hadn't changed the city, but it had shifted a woman who'd spent years hiding behind a powerful name. And sometimes, the smallest crack in the armor is where the light finally gets in.